Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode number 196 of the Board Game Barrage podcast. We are creeping ever closer to the vaunted 200, but we're not there yet. We are at 196, and I am here, your host, the Orange Tank Neelan, as always, and with me is the Mark. And
I
with
like to
me,
be called the Mark. That's not
the Mark. Sure,
Yeah.
sure. We did have a conversation at some point on how it must be confusing to see your name just written.
Oh, as like
Another contest. It's just the word Mark, right? So it must be reassuring to know that you are the Mark.
I am the Mark, and I am here along with you. But it ends at that because This is a two-hander. I think they call it in the entertainment industry. It is just you and I. We are without both the blue and the red tanks.
Yeah, so it's just going to be the two of us. We are going to be doing reader mail this week. We get a bunch of questions sent into us at our email address, boardgamebarrage@gmail.com, all of the time, and we will be answering some of the questions that get sent in by you, the listeners. But that's later on in the show, because first we should be talking about the games that we've been playing recently. And this week on the show, we'll be talking about Crusaders, Thy Will Be Done, and World of Warcraft, Wrath of the Lich King. So let's kick it off with Mark. Tell us about Crusaders.
Crusaders, Thy Will Be Done is an interesting game for me. It's one of those games where I'd heard about it, but I'd heard sort of mixed things. I wasn't really super eager to acquire it or to play it. And then, in the course of my rabid trading where I just trade games indiscriminately, I acquired it. I actually acquired the deluxeified version, and RIP deluxeified versions of anything now that TMG is no longer a working entity. But I acquired a copy of Crusaders Thy Will Be Done. This is a game by Seth Jaffe. He's also the designer of Eminent Domain, which is a space-themed game that sort of has a little bit of a Race for the Galaxy feeling where you can take actions and other players can follow. He also did Isle of Trains, which was a sort of a train game in a deck of cards. I was very excited about that one, given the theme and the conceit of it. But in the end, that was sort of like a letdown. But as I said, Crusaders Thy Will Be Done, I'd heard mixed things, so I wasn't super eager to play it. But circumstances worked out that I got a chance for the big going away party to play it with none other than the Neelan and a couple other people who played it. 4 players. So the main part of Crusaders Thy Will Be Done is the Mancala aspect. And for those who aren't familiar with Mancala games are based on the game of Mancala, where you're taking pieces from one spot and you're distributing them across other spots. So on your turn, you can select one of a number of different actions. The actions are all represented on this little personal Mancala that's on your own board. Think sort of a Trajan. Trajan, I think, is the easiest sort of one-to-one if you're familiar with that. So you have your own player board with this circle that is cut into little wedges, and each wedge has a number of cylinders on it and an associated action. Sometimes 2 actions, but for the most part, each wedge will have an associated action. And when you take the action, the strength of the action is based on how many cylinders are on that action. So, for example, one of the actions is to travel. And this allows you to move your knight, which is on another board, a shared sort of map of Europe. It allows you to move your knight along the board, and the number of movement points you have are based on the number of cylinders that is currently on the wedge. So, for example, if I want to take this travel action and I have 3 cylinders on that wedge, I can now move my knight 3 movement points. Then I pick up the cylinders on that wedge, those 3 cylinders, and now I distribute them clockwise so that the next cylinder gets 1, the one after that gets 1, and then finally the third one gets 1. And so it strengthens the next number of actions at the expense of the wedge you just used now has no cylinders on it. But then it will be replenished when other wedges are used and other cylinders are distributed. That's the crux of the game. So the actions you can do are the aforementioned travel that I just talked about, where you're moving your knight around Europe trying to get to places to get points. One way to get points is by crusading. So crusading is sort of the combat in this game. The way combat works is the number of cylinders you have on the crusading wedge is your sort of strength, plus there are modifiers that add to that strength. The modifiers come in a number of different ways, which include the muster action, which I'll explain in a minute, which is another of the actions on your Mancala. Also, buildings that you build will allow you to modify the strength of your actions. So, for example, if you take the build action, sort of jumping ahead here, if you take the build action, the number of build points you have are equal to the number of cylinders that are on that wedge, And then as you build buildings, they move from off your personal board onto the map. And when you move them, they may uncover modifiers. So if I move like a bank from my personal board to the shared board, it uncovers a build symbol. And now my build is +1. So whenever I take the build action, the strength is the number of cylinders that was on that wedge +1 here. And then, you can uncover more and more, and it becomes +2 build, +3 build. So these are sort of synergizing together so that the strength of your actions are modified based on actions you've taken. Another action you can do is muster, which is a way that you strengthen your army. Your army is what you're using to fight. Hopping back real quickly to fighting, the way fighting works is, so you count the number of cylinders that is on the Crusade Wedge, you count any modifier you have, and that is your army strength, basically. And what you are fighting you're fighting one of 3 sort of non-playing character armies. There are 3 opponents that are on the board, and their strength vary depending on how many times they've been defeated. Every time you defeat one of the 3 armies, the next time anybody fights that army, they'll be stronger. They'll be more difficult to beat. You can never fight the other players around the table, so there's no direct conflict in that way. But if I fight, and I forget the names of the armies, but if I fight the gold army, and they're a strength of 4, and I have 5 cylinders on my Crusade Wedge, then my 5 beats their 4, and I win, and I get some number of victory points for doing that. There's one army that's a little bit different, where their strength is constant, but they allow you to build, but they're the sort of the outlier. Finally, the last action that you can do is influence, and this is just strictly a point grab. The number of wedges and modifiers on the influence action gives you a number of victory points. So if I have 5 cylinders on the influence wedge, I get 5 victory points. That is important not only because you're getting points that way, but because the timer of this game is a shared pool of points. Again, sort of like Race for the Galaxy, where the timer of the game is once this shared allotment of victory points has been exhausted, and then the game wraps up. That's basically how Crusaders Thy Will Be Done works. You're building up your modifiers to make your action stronger. You're trying to attack these enemy armies because there's a way to get a lot of points. You're trying to build your buildings to not only get points, but also to strengthen your personal abilities. That's basically it. I was very pleasantly surprised by Crusaders Thy Will Be Done. I think it moves very, very smoothly. Everything fits together very, very well. I like Trajan well enough, but I find that sometimes I'm a little bit paralyzed by the number of sort of choices you can make. I just feel like sometimes the considerations of Trajan and the Mancala feel a little overwhelming or feel a little unsatisfying. I know a lot of people love it, and I get it because I think it is a very solid game, but it just never really hit me. Crusaders Thy Will Be Done maybe is a little simpler, and I think it really works. I think it really benefits the game, how clean that whole Mancala system and how everything integrates with every other aspect of the game. I think it's really, really well designed. And this might be an aspect of the lack of expectations that I went into this game with, but I was again, very, very pleasant surprised. I'm very eager to try giving it another go. But yeah, Neelan, what'd you think of Crusaders Thy Will Be Done?
Yeah, it's interesting you talk about expectations because I didn't have any about the game specifically. I knew very little about what Crusaders Thy Will Be Done was all about, but it had sort of just existed as a game name in my head. It's somewhere up there on the BGG top 500, so, I've come across it every so often. And what I had imagined based on that name as like generic dry Euro was like completely different from the experience I got, which was, a colorful game, a vibrant game, one that's quite fun. It's not directly interactive, like you said. There's no direct competition with your opponents, but what it does have instead of that is a large amount of stealing things from players right before they need to do them. Space is at a premium as to where you can build buildings. The warriors you can fight of the neutral factions are limited in their placement on the boards, and their point values might be quite disparate. So if you wanted to get the one that's worth a lot of points because it's been attacked a lot, but it's only in this corner of the map, then there's a little bit of a race to get there with your knight. So there is frequent moments of friction with players where you're stealing plots from under them and building buildings or fighting enemies before they can. And it does feel like that little race-like structure is part of, like you said, a bigger race, because effectively trying to get points as they're clocking out and timing your grabs for points when the game is about to end is a large part of it. So it's not a game where you can entirely ignore what other people are doing.
Yeah, there's a lot of like, I really would love to build and then move and then fight, but I think that if I wait and take the build action first, then Nealon is going to jump in there and fight that army that I really want to fight. So maybe I just sacrifice the build and just immediately go to move and then fight. And there's also things where like, I've got 2 cylinders on fight. I need a third one. What is the best one I can do to move a cylinder to make it to the third one, but not at the expense of just taking a wasted action? Like, what's the best suboptimal action I can do to make my fighting action one more stronger and have things chain that way?
Yeah, definitely. And that puzzle, that little action puzzle was fun. You know, there's a fair amount of staring at your board, like wondering how little cylinders are going to move around in the circle on your Mancala board. But it's a fun little puzzle because the other thing that we didn't mention was instead of taking an action, you can upgrade one of those wedges, which allows you to not only redistribute cylinders, but turn one of those actions into a double action. That's a fun thing to do.
Right.
So the process of like setting up for a future turn is both a fun action in itself, while it feels a little bit like, okay, I have to do this to set up, but now I've made my board better. So it never feels bad to do that.
Absolutely, yeah.
I think it's quite a good little game. It's hard to say from a production perspective how much of this is just a function of the deluxe edition, but that version at the very least is lovely. I enjoyed this. I thought this was great.
Yeah. And I just think it's interesting. Your own Mancala puzzle is very fun and very interesting, but it's not a multiplayer solitaire. And we've talked about this, but I just feel like it's important to like focus on this point where if you just try to maximize your own Mancala in your own game, you're going to lose because you have to take into account other players' board presence and whatever their goals and what their long-term / immediate goals and actions might be. So I like the fact that it forces you to not have direct interaction, but like keep an eye on the board and keep an eye on what other players might be doing.
Yeah. The other quick aspect I'll talk about that I really liked is that there is a little bit of player power asymmetry, which changes the way that the little cylinders get distributed on your wedge sometimes depending on the power you draft. And what's fun about that is you look at what other people have done at the end of the game. It's like, oh, you chose that as your upgrade path? Oh, it's because you had this power which leans into that. Everyone kind of takes a different route towards getting their action puzzle optimized, and I thought that was very cool.
Yeah, and the player powers, like there's one player power where instead of being forced to place the cylinders in a clockwise motion, you can place them counterclockwise. There's one that allows you to, instead of clearing a wedge once you take an action, to leave one cylinder behind. So they're quite different, and I can see them really changing the way a game plays one game after the other. So yeah, very excited to give Crusaders Thy Will Be Done another play. I really enjoyed it. So that is Crusaders Thy Will Be Done by Seth Jaffe.
Cool. So I'm going to be talking about World of Warcraft : Wrath of the Lich King. I was actually surprised, and I think I mistakenly up front said that this had pandemic in the title. Surprisingly, it doesn't. This is a pandemic game, and in fact, the box has, I don't know if this is the first game to have what is called the pandemic system printed on the box, but this is a pandemic system game. What that means, and I'm pretty sure at this point I don't really have to explain what pandemic is all about, but broadly speaking, in as short a sentence as possible, Pandemic is a cooperative game where you're trying to eliminate disease from a map. And a lot of games have utilized this by varying up the theme. It has one core system behind it, which is a card-driven end-of-turn system that determines where your, in the case of Pandemic, diseases show up on the map, and at various points you shuffle those cards from the discard pile and put them back on top of the deck. So the likelihood that they come up again and cause repeated problems is escalated at various intervals in the game. So World of Warcraft, rather than the Lich King, builds on this, but turns the theme to something entirely different. As the name suggests, this is themed around, bizarrely, specifically, an expansion from World of Warcraft, the Wrath of the Lich King expansion, where the premise is that your World of Warcraft heroes fighting on the icy continent with loads and loads and loads of undead. And then you eventually take the fight to the Ice Crown Citadel, where you fight Arthas, who is the big boss of that expansion.
Wouldn't it be great if this was just about the diseases in the World of Warcraft universe?
I would love that. That would be fantastic. just
a complete
disease.
Reskin, just a skin.
Yeah, exactly. Just an absolute reskin of Pandemic, just themed around being a healer. Yeah, that would be fantastic. But no, they've actually done a really good job of making this feel like a World of Warcraft themed game. So the basic premise is what you're doing, and I'm going to try not describe this from this point on in terms of Pandemic, but every player is playing a hero, and that hero has a unique ability. You start at different points in the map, And on your turn, you can take 4 actions. And those actions are either to move to a different point on the map, to fly to predetermined places where you have set up flight points, to take part in a quest. Now, there are 3 quests at the start of the game, and they're just distributed to different points of the map. And taking part in the quest means that you're on the quest location, and you're going to roll some dice to see how far you move along that quest chain and contribute cards from your hand in order to move along that quest chain. You can fight if there are ghouls on the spot you have, or abominations, which are bigger creatures that take more damage. Fighting in this game is a simple process of rolling dice, and depending on how many hits you reveal, that's how many ghouls you defeat. If any remain, they will deal damage back to you. You actually have hit points in this game, which is something that is pretty different from Pandemic. So if I say start with 7 hit points, and I do a fight against the ghouls, and 2 of them are left at the end of that fight, I take 2 damage. Which leads into the next action you can do, which is healing. Healing is going to be stronger if you have a healing card you can spend, or if you're at one of these strongholds that you can fly to, but that's just how you get your hit points back. And that is all of the basic actions in the game. So you're moving around the map, fighting ghouls, and trying to complete each of these quests. There's a few points of variability. Each of the quests has different difficulties associated with them, different damages that they deal when you complete them, and the Lich King is also in one of these 3 regions, making the quests and the fights in that region harder. Now, the Pandemic twist on this is every so often, like, the Scourge gets stronger. And what that means, you're adding ghouls constantly to points of the map. You are moving the Lich King around, spawning a big mass of ghouls and abominations where you sort of suddenly have to focus your attention on. And in the vein of all sort of Pandemic games, you'll eventually look at the map and realize, wow, this is a lot suddenly that we have to deal with. We have just ghouls across this half of the map. Is the balance between going off and fighting them and making sure we don't get overwhelmed, or continue to complete quests? Because what you're trying to do to win World of Warcraft Wrath of the Lich King is complete all 3 of the quests. Then a 4th and final quest gets unlocked, which is harder. And then once you've completed that one, you win. And that is kind of the gist of it. It sort of takes that system of that feeling of getting overwhelmed and ghouls showing up repeatedly on spaces that you've just cleared out moments before, but actually makes a pretty cool game that feels like you're adventuring and fighting and moving around. A license that, I have a lot of love for. I definitely think that first and foremost, your appreciation of this game is largely going to depend on how strongly you feel about World of Warcraft or Warcraft in general. But for someone who does, it really did a good job of just conveying that for me. I've spoken in the past about Pandemic Fall of Rome, which is another Pandemic game which tries to sort of add the combat elements to it. I don't think this is as solid as that game, because that game has kind of this very interesting aspect of troops moving along routes, and it gives you kind of this idea that there are fronts that are naturally going to be protected because otherwise the troops get to roam, and that's real bad. It feels a little bit more like an intelligent army progressing.
Yeah.
I would say my biggest complaint with the World of Warcraft version of this is the ghouls just kind of show up haphazardly all over the place in a way that doesn't really feel very quote-unquote intelligent, and makes them very easy to deal with. I did not find in my games of this we had much trouble keeping up with the ghoul threat, which kind of just led us at our leisure to be able to complete quests without really feeling overwhelmed. Even on the higher difficulties, we've played this now on everything but the highest difficulty and didn't have substantial trouble with it either time, which is definitely a pet peeve when it comes to cooperative games. I've mentioned this multiple times. If I'm not failing your cooperative game on the first play, I think that's a mistake.
Yeah.
That said, this is a Pandemic game, right? I've played a lot of Pandemic games. Like, I should have known going into it to jump up to probably the highest difficulty right off of the bat. That might be more on me than anything else. I guess my point is that while this does actually feel pretty unique and different, and I think will get a lot of love from people that have an affinity for the theme, it's still very much a Pandemic game, and you need to know what that means in terms of what you're getting out of it mechanically. It's not intended for a very hardcore gamer audience. Like, I would say, if that's you, which I would wager is most people listening to this podcast, Spirit Island is still the gold standard for me in this realm of cooperative games. This one feels on the simpler side, but if the theme is enough for you to excite other people into playing it with you that don't necessarily have a lot of gaming experience, I would happily say this is a great pickup. with one big caveat, Mark, which is unfortunate that this is, I think, a little bit overpriced. It is, I believe, retailing at around $60, $60 to $70, which just feels like too much. It is a gorgeous production, I will give it that, but that just feels a little bit too high for yet another pandemic.
I'm looking at the back of the box here, and I'm seeing like the ghouls, I think, sort of clustered into 3 at a, 3 in a spot and 2 in another spot. That makes it look very much like vanilla Pandemic with the cubes. So is this closer to, and I don't mean vanilla as pejorative, but like just general basic Pandemic. This looks like it's closer to basic Pandemic than Fall of Rome, because I was going to compare these games immediately based on the fact that these are Pandemic with combat. It felt like a natural tie. But this looks like it's a lot more like vanilla Pandemic than Fall of Rome.
It actually does a decent job, I would say, of being sort of a hybrid. I don't think it necessarily feels that strongly like either. The comparison to the original is very much, if you have 3 ghouls in one spot and you would spawn a 4th, then what was like the overflow rule becomes like, okay, now you're going to spawn a big abomination in that spot. And those are a pain to deal with, and you only have 3 of them you can place, and if you have to place a 4th, it's game over.
I see.
So that's the difficulty in this, is stopping spots from having 3 ghouls so that they don't get overrun multiple times in quick succession. I want to say that in some ways that aspect in Fall of Rome actually felt closer to the original, in that this doesn't have the, every connected spot gets new cubes.
Right.
I think Fall of Rome actually does. In Fall of Rome, you're picking up troops that you can carry around with you. In this, it's just you. So, I mean, there are actually weirdly some interesting subtle differences. Yeah. I would say that this feels a little bit more where Fall of Rome kind of leaned a little bit into kind of the war gaming aesthetic a little bit, just by virtue of its theme and feeling like you had multiple troops that you were managing across the map. This feels a little bit more like the hack and slash role-playing type feel of, I have this character, I'm roaming around, I'm just mowing down ghouls constantly. They rarely feel like a threat, but it's fun to feel like, okay, there were a ton of ghouls in this half of the map. Now 2 turns later, we've obliterated them. Like, there is a fun in that, but it doesn't feel taxing.
Speaking of it feeling cool that you're this character and you're this character, how are the player powers? How are like the differentiation and the coolness factor?
Yeah, so it amounts to just two abilities. It's typically like an active ability and a passive ability, and I will say for the most part they are fun to work with. So one of the characters is an archer, and her main attack is, okay, she can attack adjacent to her, and like that is cool to use strategically. Like, instead of having to waste a move, you're going to position yourself in a way that you can just obliterate a spot next to you, for example. Or like some of them have chain lightning, which affects multiple areas. Like, it's that sort of thing. They feel cool when they go off and they're effective, but I wouldn't say it's overwhelmingly asymmetric. That is World of Warcraft Wrath of the Lich King by Z-Man Games. So before we get on to the rest of the episode and our listener questions, we want to do another quick shout out to the Ghost Turkey, which is happening right now in BoardGameBarrage.com/Discord. The Ghost Turkey is our version of Secret Santa that typically runs around about Halloween to Thanksgiving. And if you want to take part, we would love to have you. This is an international gift exchange that is one big chain that is literally around the world. And you can register right now at our Discord. So yeah, head over to BoardGameBarrage.com/Discord. Check out the Ghost Turkey channel. And if you don't know what to do, just ask. Someone will happily guide you as to how you register.
I just registered a couple days ago. I cannot wait to get the email to see who I'm matched up with and get that package prepared.
I love that. It's always so exciting, just like the anticipation of who you're going to get.
Yeah.
That's always a good time. It's always one of my favorite events. One other thing I wanted to mention, I guested on the Boards Alive podcast. That episode is now up. It's episode number 162. Aaron was very kind to have me on the show, which I believe, Mark, you've been on already.
Yes.
So there was plenty of talking Mark on the episode.
Ooh.
Always good. But yeah, that was a pleasure to be a part of. You can check them out at Boards Alive is their Twitter account, or just anywhere podcasts are found. Let's get into the feature topic this week. We get a bunch of emails from you all of the time, and we're going to delve into some of the best questions we've had this week.
And we take all those emails, right? We print them all out. We put them in our mailbag, and now Nealon's going to open the mailbag.
Yeah, here's the mailbag sound.
Oh, yeah.
That's me rustling about.
I forgot how bad you do that.
Yep.
I like the zipper.
Badly? Yeah, well, see, that's me rustling around in it. It's big enough to fit inside, so I'm like swimming in there, Scrooge McDuck style.
Sure, okay. Wow, see, whenever you throw out a pop culture reference, I'm like, for some reason, surprised that it made it to South Africa. I don't know why I am. I shouldn't be like that.
I mean, it's kind of touch and go whether anything made it to South Africa and whether it did like 500 years after it came out in the US. It is funny in the case of something like DuckTales, which I thought was this cool, modern, mid-90s cartoon, but I guess like came out in the late 80s, actually.
I think it was early 90s, wasn't it? I feel like it was earlier. What was the name of the scientist, the good guy scientist?
The
something
inventor?
Gearloose?
Yeah, God, I loved his arc so much. The Gizmo Duck stuff.
Wait, his arc? What was? Oh yeah, he
becomes like Gizmo Duck.
That's right.
I can't remember. Is it
Gyro Gearloose?
Yeah,
Gyro Gearloose.
Am I misremembering? Like he builds the suit and becomes.
Yeah, no, you're right. You're absolutely right.
Yeah.
That's cool. Yeah, I forgot about.
For some reason, like that is like I say arc as if that's a thing in the case of DuckTales, but like that is the sequence of episodes that like stands out.
That was dark. I think that could be cool.
Yeah, I guess that works.
Nintendo game was super solid.
I don't know that oh God, did I play that? I don't know.
It was a side scroller, but like a side scrolling like platformer, but it was really, really good. Everything felt smooth.
Not to like derail us completely, but there is a really bizarre DuckTales PC game that is actually fantastic. It's not that bizarre, but it's kind of like you're in a race against Scrooge's rival to find treasure from around the world, and it has all of these mini games in it. It's so good.
Okay. I'll look that up.
Anyway, let's get into our first question, which comes from Jeremy. And Jeremy asks, "Hi guys and gal, thanks for the podcast. It's one of my highlights of the week. Neelan mentioned that he went to Gen Con, and I'm curious if you had any thoughts on some of these games. I've been excited to get your takes on." And what follows is just a list of games. The first one is Furnace. Some of these I think I did talk about on the Patreon episode. Mark, are you familiar with Furnace?
I am familiar with Furnace, and I'm very excited about Furnace.
Yeah, I did play a demo of this. It's cool. I'm actually excited to like try get our hands on it and play more of it because the demo was very cool. It kind of struck me as a very simple engine builder. Like Splender's maybe not the right touch point, but it's collect cards and use resources to turn them into other cards. And that sounds super generic, and it kind of is. But this auction bidding system where you acquire the card is, I think, brilliant. It's like you have to choose between whether you're going to buy a card or just exploit that card temporarily. And I think that trade-off is really, really clever.
It's like a situation where you can bid on a card with like a token from 1 to 4, right? And if you win the card, you get the card for your engine, which is fine. But if you don't win the card, you get to use the card's power the number of times based on your bid. So if somebody wins it with a 4 and you are second place with a 3, you get to use the power 3 times, something like that.
That's exactly right. Yeah. So like there is like almost this element of whether you want the card to go into your tableau more than just like, well, I just need a little bit of coal, so I'm just going to use one of my other chips. I don't expect to win it, but I hope I just get to use it a couple of times. And that changes over the course of the game, right? Because getting a card into your tableau early is great if it's a card you want to use again and again, but on the last round, it might not be worth it.
Right.
So it's a clever trade-off.
So yeah, I was going to ask, like there are certainly times where you do not want to win a card.
Oh, 100%.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah. And even that is interesting in the context of a bid, right? Because you could put a chip on something and not know whether someone is going to exceed it or not. So the timing of it is beautiful. Furnace is cool. I want to play more of that. The next one on their list is The Loop. The Loop was a Pandasaurus cooperative game. I played a demo of this, and conversely, I was a little bit underwhelmed by it. It just kind of felt a little bit generic team cooperative game.
The only thing I know about this is the box cover with like the mad scientist looking person on
yeah.
front. Yeah, okay.
The premise is you're sort of a team of, I want to say, time travelers, and you're kind of moving around a circular map and taking actions in order to accomplish specific objectives. The key mechanical thing that's cool is that you can repeat actions you've taken that are normally single use by exploiting, let's just call them time cubes on the location that you're at. So it's about managing those as a shared resource. And that's cool. It just kind of didn't stick with me, I guess, other than how it looks, which is lovely. Witchstone is the third game on this list. I don't know what that is.
I think that's the Knizia. It's a Knizia, like, deck builder or something? Is that right?
Oh, that's interesting. If I had known that there was a Knizia game at Gen Con, I probably would have paid more attention.
I've heard good things about it.
I'm going to very quickly look this up. Yeah, this looks cool, actually.
I know it's Knizia, but is it a deck builder? I forget. It's
it looks like
Knizia co-design, right?
Yeah, Knizia co-designed with Martino Chiachera, I want to say, and it looks like card drafting, route building, tile placement potentially. It looks like there's some fun stuff in here. It looks like it's always interesting to me when you see Knizia games that kind of look more on the medium heavy Euro end. It kind of reminded me of some of the stuff I was looking at Essen. It was like, oh, really? That's a Knizia game?
And it's always interesting to see a Knizia co-design because he generally is not a co-designer.
Definitely. Next one on the list is Oltréé. I did see this one. Don't know too much about it. It is a Antoine Bauza game. It looked beautiful. What I remember someone telling me about it, it's a cooperative game where you don't really know what your objective is until you've played it, if that makes sense. It's kind of you're trying to work together to figure out what you're trying to do to win. I don't exactly know what that means. I want to say it's sort of like a story narrative-based co-op. But this looked cool. I definitely want to get my hands on it to try more of it, but I don't have any strong thoughts about that, unfortunately. Finally, Origin's First Builders. This is one I was definitely keen to try seek out. It was unfortunately not on the floor, but this is a civilization building game that I think is in the 90-minute range. I'm excited to say that I'm actually probably going to get my hands on this in the next couple of weeks. So I will have, hopefully, if I get around to playing it, some thoughts to have a few episodes from now, sometime in November. But yeah, this is one that I was anticipating a lot. This was actually maybe my most anticipated game going into the show, but they didn't actually have a floor presence there, unfortunately, with it. From what I remember, it's kind of like a dice worker situation with drafting and potentially dice drafting. I'm not 100% sure about that. It is by one of the designers that has a lot of association with Awakened Realms, which is kind of potentially hit and miss for me, because for those aren't familiar, those are the Nemesis and the Lords of Hellas people, which, are both, I think, a good game and an okay game. And it's hard to tell when it's one of the designers from those games, where the contributions came from and whether this is a game that I should be excited about or wary about. But if you tell me dice workers in 90 minutes, civilization game, I'm at least a little bit interested. So, yeah, we'll see. Next question. This one comes from Jeremy as well. This is a different Jeremy.
Double Jeremy episode.
Hi, everyone. I played Terraforming. Yeah, the title is Double Jeremy. Hi, everyone. I played Terraforming Mars for the first time recently and struggled to see why it's as hyped as much as it is. It seemed like a clumsy card game with a lot of luck that took way too long. Are there any games you played where your reaction to it on the first play was very different from your expectations based on hype?
Huh. Interesting.
Mark, you've got the most experience with Terraforming Mars. Does that seem like an apt description to you?
It does. I mean, I've only played it a handful of times, and I feel like it's got to be a very good game because I just know that there are a ton of people out there who absolutely love it, and I get it. I think, and again, I don't mean this as pejorative either, but I think it's easy to get excited or to feel good about playing a Tableau/engine builder because you just get stronger and stronger, and that's a naturally fun feeling thing. So I get that because you have all these incredible stack of cards, and it seems like the possibilities are endless, and you get this hand of cards and, oh, am I going to go this way? Am I going to go this way? I've had fun every time I've played it. It's not blown me away, and it did seem like it went a little long. I know the Prelude expansion, there are a number of expansions now, but I think the Prelude expansion quickens things by cutting out some of the early curve of the game. So I'm always down to play it. It's not a game that I necessarily gravitate toward.
Yeah, I already played it once, and I played it with Prelude, so my memory is not of it feeling like terribly long, but I also didn't feel like overly moved by it, I guess. I liked it. Like you said, I had a great time doing the things that you're supposed to be doing in the game, getting cards and making more and more and more and more of a thing. But I think the thing that struck me about it, and I actually think one of the things that stuck out in my head a lot more after you spoke about, is it Ares Expedition? Is that the new version?
Yeah.
Is it just felt like, okay, this is good, but you could remove some clicks from this to get to the core of it. And it sounds like that's what Ares Expedition does. So it's kind of gratifying to see that thought experiment had played out in someone else's hands. I was like, okay, well then what's the core of this game?
Yeah.
And what is that game streamlined look like? And I should probably try Ares Expedition is kind of the long
I'd be
short
curious
of that.
to see what you thought of it. But to get to the actual question that Jeremy asks, I'm just sort of taking this as highly touted games that I got to sort of late perhaps, and ones that maybe met expectations and ones that sort of landed with a thud. For the latter, I think, and I've sort of talked about this before, but a game that I went into with super high expectations. A game that I didn't get to until quite late that just completely bombed for me, unfortunately, was Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective. I was so hyped and excited for that game. I went to great lengths to acquire it, and then when I played it, it just sort of sputtered out. It just felt like me and the person I was playing with were sort of like reading things back and forth. I can see why people like it for sure, but I was hoping to be transported into like, Sherlock Holmes, England, and it just felt like a little bit like homework to me, unfortunately.
Yeah, that's a bummer. The one thing that stands out to me is actually a game I played pretty recently, which is, I'm pretty sure in the BGG Top 100 is Lorenzo Il Magnifico. And I did not know that much about it going in, but any game that's in the BGG Top 100
sure
comes with expectations. Like, there is this idea that it's there for a reason. It's also like an older game, which is to say 5 years old, which is not that old. But like, I think that the idea that every new game gets into the Top 100 is less true the more years you go back. So anyway, I had a lot of hype and expectation for this, and I think it's a good game. I think that it is a game that I would not recommend to most people because it kind of just felt like a solid worker placement card tableau building game where you're using workers to get cards, which you use to get more resources, has sort of an engine building thing going on with it as well. But it's so entirely themeless in a way that really just actively bugged me because it's just kind of loosely Renaissance nobles. You're a noble family. Do stuff and dodge the Vatican, I guess, because victory points, and like that was the game. But yeah, no, I definitely came away underwhelmed. Like, hard to say because it's definitely, you can recognize that it's solid, and I would probably play it again. But again, for something in the top 100, I expect to be more than just
right.
Well,
I actually, it's funny you mentioned Lorenzo because I got to it late, and I enjoyed my play of it. Again, this might be a sort of a Terraforming Mars thing because it is another engine builder, and I just remember feeling that engine builder high from it. But I totally agree that the theme is sort of not really too entrenched in the game.
It's funny how like I'm becoming more and more invested in the idea that there's not an excuse anymore for your games to just be completely generic and themeless. One of the ones I guess sort of fits this bill a little bit, not really quite, because when I played Great Western Trail for the first time, it was with yourself and Callan, and I actually had this very weird arc with that game where I wasn't sure that I liked it, but then I couldn't stop thinking about it, and ever since then, I've actually been itching to play it or buy it, get my hands on it. I've bid on it multiple times in auctions and math trades. And it finally just got added to Board Game Arena, which is a digital online board game platform. And my subsequent games of it on BGA just kind of I don't know, they just didn't sit as well. They didn't work as well for me. And I know that that's not really fair because playing any game asynchronously online is very different from playing it in person. But I think I kind of just felt like, okay, I think I just got my fill of what I wanted from Great Western Trail. Enough so that where I was excited to pick up the second edition of it, which has just been recently released or is coming very, very soon at least, kind of just killed that desire a little bit. I'm intrigued to see what they do with the subsequent new versions, like the Argentina spin-off and whatever the third one is. But yeah, I don't know. Just kind of a little bit like, okay, I know what that is and I don't need it anymore.
I'm curious about what percentage of that or how much of that is based on the fact that you've played it online. I don't know. There's something about playing digital versions of board games online that for some reason does kill the excitement from me to play it in person. It's sort of sad.
Yeah.
But I just feel like it's undeniable. There's something about it. Like, for example, to get to a game that I got to late that totally exceeded expectations for me, Race for the Galaxy. And in fact, we actually are having a BGB Race for the Galaxy tournament right now. But this is a game that I didn't get to until just this year. It's been in the top 100 for a long time. Love it. I absolutely love it now. But my desire to get a physical copy is like, for as much as I love the game, is like nothing. It's like I have no desire to get a physical copy because, there are a lot of trade-offs with digital editions that are so beneficial, like the ease of play, the calculations that are done behind the scenes. All that stuff is great. And there is something lost when you're not playing across the table from somebody. But I don't know. It's just like making that calculation in my mind, like, do I want to get a physical copy of this because I get to play it with somebody like at the table? But the negative to that is we have to do the calculations ourselves. Why am I going to even make that decision? I'll just keep playing it digitally. There's something that is like saps my desire to get these games when I know that there's a digital implementation.
What's interesting is that like it depends on the game for me, and I would love to actually like do a little bit of self-analysis and try to figure out what that core is. But for example, like I spoke at length about how playing the digital version of Through the Ages makes me less likely to play the physical version, but I still feel excited about it. Like anytime I play it digitally, I'm like, man, I can't wait to play this again and show it to someone. And that happened not that long ago. Like a few months ago, I taught the physical version of Through the Ages to someone.
Yeah.
And we had a great time with it. Playing Yellow and Yangtze digital, for example, made me want to go out, get the game, and play it. And that was after having played it a bunch digitally. But I do agree with you. There are some games that are games that I may have even loved or liked a lot, but then after having played them a few times digitally, I just get this feeling like, yeah, why would I want to play this physically anymore?
And I mean, this is really bad to say. I hate saying it. I hate feeling this way. But like when I hear that there's a game that I like that has like a really good digital implementation, it bums me out because I feel like,
sure,
okay, well, this is the way I'm going to play it from now on. And it's dumb because I don't have to play it that way. But there's something about it that just makes me not want to go back to the cardboard version.
Yeah, I can relate to that for sure. Okay, let's get into our next question. Lucinda asks, I know only Neelan just went to Gen Con without the rest of you, and I know that you said you're going to PAX Unplugged, but are there any plans to go to other conventions? How are you feeling about convention going in general, post-COVID?
Well, yes, so yeah, we're going to PAX Unplugged. We are going to Dice Tower West.
Yep, that's in February.
Yep, and I'm happy to reveal here that we will be at AwSHUX, which is the online convention put up by the folks at Shut Up and Sit Down. And not only will we be there, we will be putting on an event with the folks at Shut Up and Sit Down. This is going to be a BGB versus Shut Up and Sit Down event. More details to come, but I am super, super excited about that. Not only because we're putting up this event, which should be awesome. I mean, you hear BGB versus Shut Up and Sit Down, and if you're not excited by that, you better check your pulse. But also, we've participated in one form or another of AwSHUXes, which again is a digital version of the Shucks convention in the past, and Shut Up and Sit Down always does such a great job of putting those conventions on. I have to admit, I for one have been sort of wary of digital conventions because I felt like there might be a lot lost in, putting on convention digitally, like, you lose the human interaction and all that kind of stuff. But I have been very, very pleasantly surprised by how well the AwSHUX conventions have been. They've been really, really well done. They put on a great show. Everything is done really, really well, and they've just been a blast.
Yeah, they have a Discord up where you can hang out, talk about games. There are demoers playing games, so it's a great way just to try out some unreleased games that are being demoed by the teams behind them, while the Shut Up and Sit Down people are just doing their awesome show shenanigans on Twitch, which is always fun to watch.
Yeah, so that'll be super exciting. But you've gone to a in-person convention, Gen Con, Neelan. I know you had some hesitancy going into it because, the first big convention. We went to a local convention, but that was on a much smaller scale. How did your experience with Gen Con, how is that painting what you feel about PAX Unplugged and Dice Tower West?
It's funny because it's kind of a little bit like a double-edged sword in that the way that Gen Con handled it, I thought was fantastic. They were requiring masks for everyone. The layout of the exhibition hall was great. There was adequate distance between booths, inside the booths. Unless you were sitting at a table with someone, which was necessary to demo a game, obviously, you didn't feel like you had to be brushing past people all of the time. And as long as other conventions are conforming to that level of safety, I'm kind of okay with it. I will say that the other side of the sword is that after months and months and months of being isolated and being indoors, just being around that many people was definitely a little bit overwhelming to some extent. I had to take frequent breaks just to go sit by myself in a corner of the convention center. But that said, I had a great time. The anxiety over the situation eventually sort of subsided, and I realized they were taking all the safety measures they needed to, and as long as you're being safe about it, I don't really have that much of an objection to it, as long as people are masked and keeping distance. And it's hard to say how much this is going to change for future conventions in terms of vaccination requirements or anything like that. But yeah, no, I don't have that much wariness over it anymore.
I echo everything you just said, but also I've got to just say, I cannot wait for PAX Unplugged and for Dice Tower West. I mean, I'm just
absolutely.
I am so excited. I am so excited. I mean, one, to go to a convention, super awesome. Two, just having the 3 days or 5 days devoted to board gaming, super awesome.
Yeah.
Hanging out with you guys for a solid 72 hours or more, super awesome. Seeing listeners in person, playing games with listeners, super awesome. I cannot, it's like, I feel like I'm being like pulled by the days. Like, PAX Unplugged is, I don't know, some early December. And I just feel like I'm drawn by that date on the calendar. I just cannot wait. And I mean, for as excited as I am for PAX Unplugged, which I'm super excited. And I didn't even mention math trades, like in-person math trades, Jesus Christ. But Dice Tower West. I've moved to Vegas, as I've mentioned on the show, and you guys are going to be staying at my place for 5 days. It's like utopia. Like, I just cannot imagine a more fun experience. So I cannot wait.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think both are going to be fantastic for exactly the reasons you mentioned. Have you been to Philadelphia before?
I have not.
Okay, so even the pull of like a new city is kind of exciting in and of itself. Yeah, no, there are so many incredible memories in the history of the podcast for us. But for me, being in Vancouver with the four of you, like so in unfamiliar terrain, just walking around and just taking it all in together,
so fun.
was incredible. Yeah. And that's what I'm excited about with PAX Unplugged. And like you said, just the 5-day camp out at your place in February is going to be great.
Cannot wait. All right.
Okay, next question. Soyun, I'm sorry if I'm not pronouncing that correctly. They ask, Mark, how's the move to Vegas going and how's it affected your gaming? Have you found any gaming groups out there? So we touched on this a little bit, but what's your Vegas gaming situation been so far, Mark?
My Vegas gaming situation has been pretty limited as it stands now. I have not found any gaming groups. I haven't really been trying to find any just yet. I'm still in the process of like unpacking, which I think is going to be a multi-month process. But so I'm still early on that. But I've mentioned this before, but in my gaming, trading, and acquisition stuff, I've been seeing this coming, and I've been sort of leaning towards acquiring more solo games. So I've been playing some solo games recently. One that I just played a bunch of is Marvel Champions. I know that the Pigeon Blood, right?
That's right. Yeah, yes. They got us onto it. I actually picked it up at some point a while ago and I haven't even tried it yet. So okay. I'm curious to hear what you think.
Yeah. So to cut to the chase, I've really enjoyed it. I like it a lot. Yeah. For those who don't know, the way that it works is you pick a hero and you pick a villain and you have these sort of pre-built decks, although you can modify them if you want in the sort of like advanced game. But I just went with the pre-built decks and you draw a number of cards and you play them out. You can use cards to power other cards or you can use cards for whatever their power is, and you sort of fight the villain, and you've got like sort of schemes, like side missions that you have to deal with as you're fighting them. And again, I think Dan Hughes sort of mentioned this, but one thing I really like about it is the different heroes feel very different. They behave very different. Like one aspect of the game is every hero you have has like an alter ego. So if you're playing as Spider-Man, you can flip the card over one time per round and play as Peter Parker, and that affects the sort of things you can do. But one thing I like is like the asymmetry of the character. So like the one that jumps out the most at me right now is Iron Man. So the Iron Man character, you sort of have to build him up. Like you have to build the technology. So, you have Tony Stark and you have Iron Man, and Iron Man starts out pretty weak where you only have one card in hand initially with Iron Man. Your hand size limit is just one. But as you build up the suit as Tony Stark, as you build up the Iron Man character, your hand limit grows and grows and grows, and you become super powerful.
That's cool.
Every character has these like wrinkles where they just play quite differently. I'm curious to ask you like how you would approach this. So I have some expansions that I traded for this game. So I have some expansions, and so I have a number of heroes and I have a number of villains. And the way I've chosen to play it is I've chosen to play one villain with like every hero until I beat them, and that's another thing. Some heroes do better or worse against some villains. So like, for example, and this is also a function of me not really knowing the game, but the first combination I played was Spider-Man versus Rhino. I was playing as Spider-Man, and it took me, I think, like 10, 12 games to win. And each game, I think, is about, depending on how quickly you get beat, 20 to 45 minutes, maybe an hour. So it's pretty quick. So the way I was playing it was I'm going to play as one character and keep playing until I beat the villain, and then I'll move on to the next character and keep playing until I beat the same villain. So I've played like 6 heroes, but only against Rhino. And then the way I'm thinking is I'm just going to go through all the heroes until everyone beats Rhino, and then I'm going to take the next villain and go through it that way. How would you approach it if you had a number of heroes and a number of villains? How would you handle that?
I kind of love that idea, but it definitely seems exhaustive to an extent that I probably wouldn't engage with. Like, I would probably... I love the idea of, like, if I was playing one villain and I didn't beat it, I would probably switch to a different hero to, like, try see if that combination worked. I would probably switch villains after I beat them once, to be honest. But I would love the idea of, like, cycling back around to them and being like, okay, here's a villain and hero that I know I didn't win with in the past, but now that I've got more experience with that hero or that villain, now I'm going to try it again and see how much my game is improved. But I like the idea of the 1v1 matches until you've, like, mastered it almost.
Yeah.
I worry with that you will lose steam on certain heroes.
Well, so
that makes sense.
The reason that I think that it works, at least for me, is like, so I've played Spider-Man until I beat Rhino, and then I go to the next hero, I go next hero, go next hero. So it's like, it's been now some time since I played Spider-Man again. So I'm sort of like, I haven't played him in a while. Let me try him again. So once I get through the cycle, I feel like going back and starting the cycle over again, I'll be sort of refreshed. I mean, I don't know how it's going to work out in practice. And I think a lot of board gamers have that like completionist itch to them. So this is like a way to like get that completionist thing going. But I would recommend Marvel Champions to anybody looking for a solo game. I know it can be played cooperatively, but it works really, really well solo. And so, yeah, like I've said, I've been leaning towards acquiring more solo games and just trying to figure out what solo games I'm even interested in. One resource that I've sort of gone to is there is a yearly list of like the best solo games as voted on by the BGG community. The submissions are going on for it right now. It's not something I'm going to be submitting to because I don't have the experience to contribute, but this is a yearly list of the top solo games put on by BGG user K Erskine, Kerskine. So they're going through the top solo games of 2021 right now. So I've gone through the older year's list and looked into games that I thought were interesting. So I think some of my next reviews on the show are going to be for solo games. And I'm sort of excited. Like, I'm looking to trade right now for Mage Knight, which a lot of people will say. And I know you're a huge fan of.
Yeah, a massive fan of Mage Knight. Like, funnily enough, in the context of what we were talking about earlier, that is a game I would happily switch to playing exclusively digitally. But yeah, Mage Knight is a wonderful game. Probably a game that I would have enjoyed a lot more solo had I put the time into it. But I'm curious to hear what you think about that for sure. Okay, our last question to close us out is, I guess, less of a question, more of a sentence from Bill, who just writes, "We have to talk about Squid Game."
Oh.
To which I will say very quickly, Mark, I still have not watched Squid Game.
So we can't talk about Squid Game.
Let's not talk about Squid Game. We talked about this actually a fair bit on our bonus episode on Patreon. So if you do want to hear mostly Kellen's thoughts, I think he was the only one who had finished it at that point on Squid Game, you can check out that at boardgamebarrage.com/Patreon. But Mark, you'd watched one episode. Have you watched more since then?
I have since watched the entire run of the show. Yeah, I guess Patreon would be the place to get into this more in depth. But I will say that I really enjoyed it. I think that it's naturally interesting for people who are into like video games and board games because of the conceit of the show where, there are people that are running through games that are, they're participating in games. So there's a natural like overlap between, I think, board gamers and video gamers and people who would be interested in this show. I don't want to get too much into it because, we're a board game podcast and some people may not be interested, or some people like Neelan might not want to hear about it because they haven't watched it yet. But I will say on our next bonus episode, again, at boardgamebarrage.com/Patreon, I will go deeper into it. And at that point, if Neelan hasn't watched it, he will have to exit the room, I guess.
Just suffer through it. No, my hope is, in fact, I could see myself starting it tonight. My hope is I will definitely have finished it by the time we record the next bonus for sure.
One thing that I will mention is that I was sort of like hesitant to watch it initially, and this is something I asked Kellen on the bonus episode because I thought it might have like an aspect of like sort of body horror, and which is something that puts me off when it comes to horror, like things that are like grotesque to that extent. And he said that the violence, which is abundant, I mean, you can't get away from that, was sort of like over the top and therefore a little desensitized, which is, maybe not a great way to sort of deal with it. But I will say that if you had my concerns, it sort of is like Kill Bill in the way that it's like over the top violent. So it just feels less real. It feels more like a video game, like a shooter video game. So I didn't have trouble with the gore, which again was a big thing that put me off checking out initially.
Got it. It's kind of been interesting existing in a world where everyone is talking about Squid Game, and I'm sort of very prominently trying to avoid everything about it. Because I feel like I can't browse Twitter without someone posting like a GIF, and I'm just like, is this a spoiler? I don't know. There's a plastic girl that I know is from Squid Game, but I don't know what the relevance is. And then everyone talking, there's like news articles going around about how there's this major upset because kids are now playing Squid games in the playground, and is that appropriate or something? I don't know. I don't know what any of it means, except that kids are apparently murdering each other in our very schools. But that, I think, is going to close it out for this episode of the Board Game Barrage. Thank you to everyone that wrote in. We love getting your questions. Please send us more. We love doing these episodes occasionally as the mailbag fills up. So you can write in at boardgamebarrage@gmail.com if you want to hear your question on a future show. Otherwise, you can join us at boardgamebarrage.com/Discord. Join the Ghost Turkey. Or just hang out and chat with other board gamers and talk about the podcast. We're there hanging around talking about board games as well. So come and join us at boardgamebarrage.com/Discord. Otherwise, you can join us on all of our social media. We're on Twitter. We're on Facebook. Thank you, as always, to Heart Society for our intro and outro music. What's on your mind, kid? Goodbye.
Goodbye. Now, Nealon, you can close the bag. Close the mailbag. That's rustling through the mailbag. That's not closing.
I'm getting out. I'm getting out of the mailbag, Mark.